thing I actually want to say right off the bat, I owe you an apology because I realized that when I had done the review for Hell Hath No Fear, and believe me, I tried to do my very best to try to condense as much information as I can in a short span of time without overcompensating. And then when I look at the review, I'm content with it. But then I realized there's a lot of things I've left out as far as, names and people who I want to bring attention to. And you're one of those people that I forgot to bring up in the review, which I felt really bad doing so, which is and I wanted to go back and re-edit that. But then since I've already got comments on there and the amount of views, I figured maybe I should just leave it as it is. So
Yeah,
so I do apologize for not including you in that review or giving you credit because you I think, had done a fantastic job. But I was also kind of confused about it too, about how it's credited, because it says you wrote the script and then there was a written by credit as well too.
yeah.
So how does that work out? Because I was never actually familiar with how that's actually credited for someone who's involved with the movie.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's totally fine to have not brought that up, because I do feel like film is the director's medium.
Right.
And I think that, of course, you want a good foundation with what you're shooting, but ultimately the director really creates their own world. A quick disclaimer: my granddad's Italian. I talk with my hands so much that if you
As do I. So we're in good hands here.
I'm
No
gonna
pun
be
intended.
I know. I always notice that on Zoom because I can, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so generally how it works is often the original writer will get story by, and then if there are additional screenwriters that come on and they write over a certain percentage of or in their rewrite, they write on it a certain amount, then they will get sometimes a writer credit along with the original writer, or the original writer will get story by, and then that writer will get screenplay by. It's kind of, credited in all different ways. You might share a credit, but generally if you're brought on like I was to do a rewrite, because it was also a translation from a French script,
Right.
and then I was writing to fit Jesse's vision. So once I came clear on Jesse's vision, and then he was able to share that with me, and then I was able to do a rewrite on it more towards what he was thinking, and then that's why I got the screenplay by.
So because I've talked with Jesse in the past too, and to me, he seems like he said on many occasions that he doesn't really care to take writing credit. It seems like he's really open to the idea of just allowing the writers to do as I would almost say to do as they feel to help make the story better. So did he give you a lot of freedom to do that, or did he already have it said, do it like this, but add whatever you want to it as far as the story is concerned?
Well, the way we work together, he's a fantastic action director, as you know, and so he handles the action part of it. I wouldn't even attempt that, and he likes to bring me on mainly to focus on the female characters and then the relationships between the characters. Often, in a lot of action films, because it hasn't been a woman's domain really, nothing wrong with that. We all have our different, genres, but those characters, especially if it's a female lead, can sometimes be a little underdeveloped, or maybe I think he wants a woman's perspective on it, of, just like I would write a woman better than I would potentially a man. I think he wanted that female perspective for Marie, since she was front and center and our protagonist. And so he definitely gave me leeway in that arena while he handled the action. And then I ended up, because she is the central character, that did affect the relationships with all of the other people. And he knows that one of my passions is to create these really strong female protagonists who are really complicated and are really, emotionally resilient. And so he definitely he was like, go for it.
So, and I happen to see a post you made on your Instagram where you had actually visited the set. So were you there to help contribute more to the script as far as the shooting script is concerned, or were you just simply there on just checking out how things were looking from a spectator standpoint?
Yeah, it was more door number two. He invited me down for a visit so I could see it. By then, because we were working on quite a tight timeline. So by then it was just, we had I had turned in my version and he had approved it and he'd handed it out to the actors. And I was there simply as a visit to see how it was all going. And it was great to
So
see.
how long were you there for the shoot? Because I only saw what you posted there. So were you there a lot longer, say more than a day's worth of
Oh, no,
seeing?
no. I was
Okay.
just visiting for a couple of hours because
Oh, okay.
when you're in the middle of shooting like that, any additional person coming to the set,
Mm,
it is kind of not so much a distraction, but there is, that they were working in a very close bubble
right.
because of COVID, because of
Right.
time constraints. Because he was creating this little world, which is why the film turned out the way it did, right? He created a very specific world and kept people really safe and close. And so you never want to disrupt that for too long. So, I just came down and said hi and met the cast, but you don't want to kind of, you want to stay on the periphery too. You don't want to be getting into people's business because acting's all about make believe and creating this world. And so they're usually, most films are quite strict about who
Right.
comes to visit, and even
Yeah.
more so in COVID, because of course then we had to test to make sure we had negative tests to come.
So I'm curious now. You wrote the script, you're seeing along. I'm sure you saw some dailies at some point as production was going through. And then when the film was finally finished, were you at any point invited to check out how the progress was made as far as the editing is concerned, and then seeing the final product at the end once everything was said and done? Were you part of that process too, at least watching it, how he was putting it all together?
Yeah, I did actually. He invited me to a screening of it. It was like the penultimate pass. So there was still some tweaks that were going to be made.
Mhm.
The sound design wasn't entirely locked, and neither, I don't think the music was. And Nina was there, and she was there kind of giving feedback. And it was this really nice kind of creative, it wasn't casual, but it was just a very warm, creative environment where he'd invited some of his trusted fellow collaborators, and then me and Nina. And I think we were actually at the composers, and he was kind of tweaking the music as
Right.
we were, and we watched it all the way through and then gave some feedback. I actually didn't really have any, in the sense there were a couple of things I gave positive feedback about, but yeah, it was great to see.
When you heard as far as what was being given to Jesse, him asking questions about what could be tweaked and whatnot, did you ever feel at any point that you felt the need to say something that maybe you may not have agreed upon, and or maybe that you weren't thinking about and then didn't understand right off the bat, and then as you started seeing everything being put together made more sense to you, or maybe you were still questioning until you finally saw the final product as it is now? Like, were you still kind of in and out of it as far as you wanted to contribute some sort of uh, comment to help with the project, or you just completely just stayed out of it altogether, just to say, all right, you're in charge, therefore I'm just going to be watching until everything is done?
I think what I'm hearing, I understand what you're saying. And I think the danger is that I kind of learned early on in my career that we all as humans have a tendency that we feel like we should contribute something or
Right.
give notes,
Yeah.
and I learned that if you don't have any notes or you don't have any creative contributions, it's okay if you don't have anything to say. And when I started off, I'd sometimes find myself reaching for things to say because I felt like I had to contribute, or I had been in experiences where I had my own projects and I felt like people were giving me notes just for the sake of the notes, as opposed to did they
Right.
really have anything valuable to say. And I really wanted to avoid that. And so I think I just showed up to the screening really curious as to how, like I said, film is a director's medium.
Right.
They will often in the moment, need to act scenes, like as in get rid of scenes or put scenes together, or because time constraints or financial constraints, or in the moment, this beautiful, magical thing happens when they're like, oh my God, the scene isn't about that. It's not even about what it was in the reading. The actor's bringing something in that moment, right? This is the magic that I never even thought of. Or there's a chemistry here between these actors that I didn't even imagine. And a great director like Jesse will follow that thread, you know, or like I said, there could be, you're losing light, the setup's taken longer, so the script goes in a different direction. And so in that sense, unlike TV, which is the writer's medium and generally stays very close to the script, I feel like film, there's a door that's opened. And, you know, I'm really mystified, and I love that process. So I was coming into the screening very curious, especially because of the speed at which it happened. I was like, what did Jesse do with this? Like, how is it going to be seeing that taken off the page? And so I think I had a couple of things that I'd written down, and then I thought, actually, no. And I might have said one or two things, but I didn't feel a great need to start, you know, giving a bunch of notes, because I didn't really have any. I
Well,
didn't want to make anything up.
so when you saw everything being completed and seeing how it turns out now, I mean, obviously, I'm assuming that you were very content and very happy with what you saw in its final form, considering the amount of work that obviously was involved, which you were fully aware of, and what you had done to help Jesse formulate his vision with the script, and then of course everyone else having to do their bit to help carry the story too. So when you watched it for the first time in its final form, what was the first thought that came to your mind after watching it?
I can remember it exactly. And I thought, he has exceeded the script. Like, he has done so much more than what I saw on the page. I just said that to him, I think either today or yesterday, in a conversation, that I was taken aback by that what I saw and what I had, you know, helped contribute on the writing side, he had taken it and really created something, you know, wonderful, considering the constraints, right, of COVID, the time frame, the budget, you know, all of that. I thought it was really, I was very, very pleasantly surprised.
So, and now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna shift gears here, because there's
Yeah,
something
of
you had said
course.
that I wanted to bring up here, because you know, you definitely touched upon about the, you know, the differences in shooting television, where the writers are pretty much in control, and then do shooting film, where it's mostly the directors, and everything else comes along the way to kind of just add on to the ingredients and make the final product. So when I had asked to speak with you, like I said before, one of the first things I like to do is look into who I'm reaching out to see what they've done that I could really connect with, to find something that I could see where they're going with their direction as far as acting is concerned, script writing, whatever the case may be. So I ended up watching Solitary, which is directed by your husband, which I didn't know
Yes.
at the time. So, and here's what I found out really, and I hope you can explain further into it if you're able to, because when I saw the movie, I really loved what you guys had done with the film, and what I had picked up on in a previous interview, which was a very short one, but it definitely left a lot for me to think about, which was that the character you had played, Nora, uh, she's she's not a likable person. Okay, you had mentioned something in one particular interview that there was a point where you had presented the story or script, I would imagine, to a number of different people, and they had all asked you make her likable, because she cannot
Mm,
be this undesirable person that doesn't people don't want to be around, because she definitely presents herself that way in the beginning of the story, and as the story progresses, she's still not that very likable along the way. There are pockets where you can see a humanity in her,
yeah.
but then, you know, as the story progresses, she reverts right back to her selfishness and her insecurities and whatnot. And then you mentioned before that your husband, you trusted him because you felt that he understood what you're trying to go for, and the importance of telling the characters in a position where she's not going to be liked, and that's important to tell, because there's a complexity behind that, which does get revealed later on in the story. So when you went through that process of reaching out to people to help make this movie, could you explain to me about what it was specifically about, apart from the concerns that the character wasn't likable, but what was it about the character and the changes that they wanted you to make that was going to essentially water down the entire story? Because from what I saw in the movie, I'm glad that you stuck with that once I have learned after the fact that the way the story had ended, which kind of leaves a questionable ending as far as did she or did she, you know?
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you could explain and explain that journey to clarify what the experience was that had made you stick to your guns, and also whether or not if you have to consider to possibly give in and possibly change the story just for the sake of the producers or whoever else that was making those requests.
Yeah, these are all really great questions. And I do want to start with saying that this was pre the Me Too movement. And I
Right.
think that's a really important, that was a really important moment in time because it
Right.
dealt with the similar issues to what the film was dealing with. And I did write the script with the intention of, and I do also want to say, I never used the word unlikable until I started to hear that word, because for me, I thought, okay, so she's flawed, she
Hmm.
cheats, she's, you know, a bit of a, she's what's the word for
She's
it?
a
You know,
drunk and
yeah, she's one of those drunks where, you know, you could have the best night out, but it could potentially end in tears. Very
mm,
emotionally volatile,
yeah.
you know, has these moments of infidelity, kind of not very responsible.
Hmm.
But none of these things I felt like, I think, you know, if it's the interview I'm thinking of, I haven't seen male protagonists do a gazillion times. And we kind of love it. She's kind of like a Jack the Lad, right? But in the
Yeah.
female form, a bit
Yeah.
of lovable rogue. And so I didn't kind of, I wasn't aware of that till I started to send it out. And to me, it was very clear what I was trying. One of the themes that I was trying to say is these people aren't born this way. Something
Right.
happens to them. And when something happens to them, it is not potentially the event itself, it's how the event is dealt with within the family, by society, and how the
Interesting.
consequences of that handling of this tragic event kind of ruins it for all of us, because the repercussions of that lead to, you know, the tragic event that happens, you know, a third of
Yeah.
the way through the film.
Yeah.
There is a price we all pay for this kind of tragedy within a family and the way that the family handles it. I feel like these kinds of things happen in families all the time. Sadly,
Yeah.
the treatment of these things could be handled in a very different way. And I really wanted to kind of look into that. So that to me felt very clear. And it could have been naivete that on my side that I thought that was quite obvious that someone with that kind of character, there was a reason for it. So when it started to go out and I got that note back, she was too unlikable. She was too unlikable. I think what people were deeply uncomfortable with was that she was already kind of roguish, right, before this
Hmm.
tragic event had occurred. And what I heard from a lot of, not to make it a gender issue, but what I heard from a lot of male creatives was they wanted her to be this innocent, beautiful flower that a tragic event corrupted.
So was it a lot of male men that were responding back to you and asking you to make those changes to make the character more appealing for the story?
Yeah,
Mostly male, or just as a bit of mix of men and female?
no, it was only men. I think the women,
Interesting.
especially with creatives that I would be collaborating with, really understood her and also didn't kind of see her in so much. She was flawed, but I mean, we all know, I mean, we've all lived in that way in some ways. It's just those aren't the kind of women that are often in movies, right?
Hmm.
Unless they're the virgin, the mother, and the whore. Like, so if
Yeah.
she's that whore character type, but she's also complex and also deep, and then we have to get kind of uncomfortable because we have to understand the part that we all play in the creation of these kinds of people.
Yeah.
I think that's the rub. So I feel like I'm waffling a bit, but
No, I'm glad you're doing that because I'm getting a better understanding with because what's important for me to understand is that, like I said before, I saw the movie. I really did love what you did with the story. You, your husband, everyone else involved. I really was very happy with what you guys were going for. And I love the way that it ended without rooting for anybody. But the way that it ended, it leaves you with that question mark: does she or doesn't she? And it's a very good one to end on that for when people, or if people to watch the film, they'll understand what I'm referring to here. But when I saw that, and then I'm listening to you make that commentary about what people were insisting on you changing, it confused me. I understand why they were saying that, but it just confused me because I thought if they know a good story, then they should be able to tell. The artist should be able to tell the story. But I understand there's a business aspect of it too, which that's another thing that that kind of just I thought about too. There's a business side of it where they don't want the character to be too dark because then you can't sell it to the audience, right?
Absolutely.
And
And
I
will the
understand that.
audience get behind her?
Mhm.
Are the audience going to be comfortable rooting for a flawed woman in the same way that they would be comfortable rooting for, the lovable rogue male protagonist? And
Mhm.
I felt like it would be a disservice. And one of the solutions that was offered to me that I didn't want to take was that she was really lovable in the beginning as a young girl.
Mhm.
She wasn't going out already, getting drunk, sleeping on the doorstep. And this event changed her irrevocably, but that you could get behind. And that wasn't acceptable to me either, because then you're basically saying, well, then the only people who are worthy of any kind of redemption have to start off in a way that makes you comfortable, which is
Right.
this, as I was saying before, this innocent flower that the event corrupts. Or what if she's kind of already kind of complex and roguish and a little bit mischievous? If you go down that route that I've just put out, you're basically saying, well, then if you're not that, are you worthy of the same
Right.
treatment? Are you worthy of the same story? And so that was very important to me.
There was another thing that you commented on, and I'm trying to remember because there's a lot that I've seen, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm asking this correctly from where I've heard this from. But I believe it would have been something that you had done on a one woman show that I see you had done, where you made a commentary about how, I guess in England, or at least in that part of England where you're from, where you're in the northeast of England, I think it was
Middle,
Redcar.
yeah, Redcar is my
Yeah.
home. Yeah.
So you had mentioned something in that particular one woman show where you were saying that that in England it's not normal to talk about your feelings, or at least in that part of the country. At least growing up for you, I would imagine. So when I because I saw that first, and then I saw your film, and I remember distinctly thinking halfway through the movie of seeing what you want to see, hearing what you want to hear, things of that nature, and I'm seeing that kind of play out in the film, and I thought, oh, so this is also a cultural thing too that I'm
Yeah, it
starting to
really
notice as
is.
well. So, and especially in that part of the country, which I've never been to, but it was nice to seeing that perspective of you writing about a particular area in England that I am not too familiar with at all. And it was nice to kind of get that cultural background of your character and seeing what I would imagine what in some people in certain situations like that, or at least something close to that, what the everyday family is going to be like under those circumstances where they just keep everything tight lid and they're not going to expose that. And then the confrontation that comes with that as well too, how they would handle it depending on, I guess, that part of the stage in their life. So there was a lot that I took from that movie that I really did come to understand that actually made a lot more sense, especially when I'm listening to other things you've made about the commented about the film, you and your husband as well, but primarily you, because obviously that's your home country. But so when you wrote the story, and then actually you and your husband and everyone else is shooting the film, um, were you very were you is it was it important for you to have that in the film for those reasons, or was it just natural for you to bring it up to tell that story, knowing you're having your cultural background infused with the story, because being that it's taking place in your homeland or in your hometown, if you will, of where this of how everything is played out in this for that narrative.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think that things have really changed globally, but I do think it's still very hard for English people at least I don't want to make any generalizations or
Right.
have a bunch of English people
Yeah,
be
I was trying to be
like,
careful how I asked it because I didn't want to make that assumption
yeah,
either.
but I do, being English and born and raised, I feel I can comment at least on my experience, which was, talking about our feelings, and maybe it's also my generation, was very challenging. And one of the challenges that my husband, I know, struggled with when we first met was I found it very hard to talk about my feelings, and he's an American
Mhm.
and he doesn't find it as hard. And so it would, that was something we really had to work on. And I think having moved to America and then being able to see my culture and my country kind of from a perspective, I definitely wanted to, that was very important to write about, was this culture of silence that I felt around all kinds of things and feelings. And obviously, of course, it's also, we have the monarchy, which are the absolute epitome of restraint and keeping things inside, and that
Mhm.
you don't
Mhm.
make a scene and you don't make a fuss, and we've gone through these, at least in this century, the last century's 2 world wars, and that was all about loose lips sink ships, and you didn't speak because
Mm.
actually talking could cost lives. And that I really understood kind of pervaded the culture of
Interesting.
stiff upper lip, you got on, keep calm and carry on. And
Yeah.
that's not something you can just switch off and then expect people to be like gushing about their internal lives, like
Mm.
it's definitely, it was a part of my upbringing, and I wanted to look at, well, what are the darker costs of that, you know
So I'm hoping this is a fair question to ask you. Because I know this isn't actually really based on anything with your own personal. Because I know this is you're kind of drawing from stories you may have heard and then just kind of creating a narrative. But was writing the film, making the movie, and acting in it, and so on, was that kind of therapeutic for yourself as well too? Considering coming from England where you weren't, growing up, I meant to say, you don't necessarily express your feelings. Then coming to America, meeting your husband, and then learning along the way how you're able to do so, writing the story and then making the film and having that form of expression to talk about these things, was that helpful for you in some way or shape or form to be able to, I guess, step out of your shell, if you will?
It was, I kind of scared myself for sure.
Mm.
It was therapeutic and also one of the most difficult things, because although it's not the story of my life, I have sisters and I have a very complex family structure, and there were things that I definitely examined within that I knew were deeply personal, and that was really scary. That
Mm.
was terrifying to then uh, make a film like that, and then also to have questions raised about how personal it is and whether I would need to kind of talk about that and how my family would feel.
Mm.
And I don't know if it was therapeutic as much as I kind of hid away, I think, for a few months after that. Like I kind of
Really?
retreated and got really afraid because, again, I told, and even however you want to interpret that, like any kind of, if you were to take any part of your family structure, or even if it was just, like I did, the idea of not talking about our feelings, or the different relationships within one family between siblings, you still feel like in some ways you've you know revealed things that are really personal. And so I definitely scared myself with that. And the other thing I wasn't prepared for at all was the reaction I got. Why would you make a film like this? What is wrong with you? Why would you do something so
Mhm.
dark? Why would you look at
Yeah.
something, because again,
Yeah.
pre-Me Too, had the Me Too movement have happened, I think this whole film would have been a totally different experience. But I definitely uh, got kind of shamed by some people, a couple of producers who, after the film was made, that I was asking for distribution advice, yeah, were very much like, why did you do this? Then there was an experience at a smaller festival that actually we won Best Narrative Feature in, which was really incredible. But I remember the programmer saying, yes, we saw that at a much larger festival, and we couldn't, with a subject matter like that and no big names, we could never have screened it. And so I definitely, I definitely got that reaction. And then it got right after the Oscars, it was the 2016. Joe Biden came and talked about The Hunting Ground. Lady Gaga came up on stage and performed Until It Happens to You, and Spotlight won. Now, all of those three things were huge in changing the conversation around sexual assault and abuse and rape. And, a couple of weeks after that, we were able to get distribution, because I feel like it became a little more comfortable. And then it got released November 2016, I think right before Trump was elected, and there was a conversation around that. And then, it was interesting, because I feel like it was right before a time where people were comfortable about talking about things like that. And now it's a very different landscape.
So was your reaction different after all those set of events, and then you being able to get distribution and having the film released on a much more wider platform? Did you get a different response from everybody since that?
I mean, I do still get emails and correspondence from survivors and people who are very profoundly affected by it, which is, of course, like the best thing ever. Like, that's more meaningful than any award or any kind of critical acclaim you could get, is actual feedback from real people who have in some way been touched, in some way have felt less alone, or have watched Nora go through her struggles and have felt like, that to me, sorry, it makes me really emotional. That to me is like everything, and so if it could in some way be part of the conversation before or after, that's why you make films like that.
What I really appreciate about the story, again, without really getting into spoil, because I don't want to ruin for anybody who hasn't seen it, because there's a lot that I want to ask, but I just don't want to do it now, because I don't want to ruin the experience for anybody who hasn't seen it. But one of the things that I really loved about the story was because I mentioned before that the character of Nora is not a very likable person. You kind of the first impression is that she's a problem.
Yeah, hot mess.
Yeah. So, but as the story progresses, as I mentioned before, you learn about her complexities. You understand, why is the way that she is, and then you go further and deeper into the rabbit hole, if you will, and then you start to realize, oh, okay, well, there was a reason for that. And then there's, again, without getting into spoilers, there's another complexity behind, after what had happened, that the series of this event that occurs, and you're still left to wonder, are you still rooting for her despite that, despite the epiphany that she's starting to go through? That was what I gravitated the most with the story. I mean, the film was good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not singling this as being the reason why I like it. I love what was being done in the film, but the reason why I gravitated the most with the story is because that complexity about that character, where it's a very difficult thing, I think, for people to really learn to accept. And then there's certain characters as well too that are confronting your character, that leaves you to question, what would you have done in that situation if you were that person. And I thought the way that it was handled was actually quite beautiful, to be honest with you. But at the same time, when I think about the film now, there's a darkness to the story, and it's not a very dark looking film, which is what I liked about it. There's that dichotomy, which looks beautifully shot, lights and everything has a really nice color palette to it. But that's what I liked about the film too, which I was hoping that you can maybe you can share your husband's side of it too, with regards to how you guys wanted the film to look. But the film looks beautiful, like a nice blue tint to it, but the story is rather dark. And then you have that like I said, that the both sides of the coin of seeing the lightness of the area, the beautiful side of the country in the city as well. And then all of a sudden you get the darkness of the character. And that's what I said before, what I was gravitating to. So I understand that it was also very at times it was difficult because you guys weren't necessarily shooting in from from start to finish, from beginning of the script to the end. It was kind of all over the place from what I understand.
Mhm.
So you were almost all over the place as a result of having to keep those emotional beats in ready to go for certain sequences. So when you guys were coming together and you and your husband and everyone else involved on how you want the film to look, was it a decision you guys made to make it look as good as it looks aesthetically, as opposed to keeping it a dark, grimy look to make it feel that way for the audience? You see what I'm saying? Because when you look at it on first view, it does not the story that I'm explaining to the audience. I'm sure they may imagine it as a dark, gritty story, and it's the
Yeah.
furthest from that as far as the looks are concerned.
Yeah, that's a really great question. There is a huge genre in England of these kitchen sink dramas, which I definitely wrote and was inspired by.
Mm,
And typically, not always, they are, as you described, quite dark, underlit, often handheld, kind of
mhm.
shaky, grainy. Sasha wanted to very much avoid that trope because that was my first feature script that I wrote, and it flirts with melodrama, or it could. So he definitely didn't want to pile anything on top of what was already a very dramatic story. And he also was, he wanted it to have a voyeuristic quality.
I
And
can
so
see
he
that.
put the
Yeah.
camera on sticks, and he only does one handheld shot in the whole thing. And it's when she comes out the pub and she's a little drunk.
Yeah. 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 I remember. Yeah.
Aside from that, it was all on sticks, and it was all, he wanted to try to um, have the audience be witnessing silently what a lot of society witnesses silently. And that was definitely one of the themes
Interesting.
that he wanted to
Interesting.
really enhance with the shooting style, was this idea of the silent witnesses, that we're observing this happening, and we feel, for whatever reason, that we can't speak, that we're just forced to watch. So I know that was definitely a theme that he was going for. And then we shot on the Arri Alexa, which is my absolute favorite camera. Wasn't the Alexa Mini, it was extremely large, and we were in a very, very small house. I'm laughing because I can just remember the DP, like, tied up in knots,
Interesting.
trying to get this camera in these rooms. But I think what you saw was the set, Easy Rider. They
Mhm.
bought a foreign DP, I think he was Swedish, to shoot that. And it was his total love for America and his totally unjudgmental eyes that, elevated that film
Yeah.
to almost look like a love affair with America, right? And I think because we actually shot in the south of England, and my extended family are all from Portsmouth. So we shot down there, and I brought this American director, Sasha, over, and he had no judgments about Portsmouth or about that. It
Interesting.
was a, you know,
Oh.
it can be sometimes viewed by England as kind of a faded working class community. It was a big naval port.
Mhm.
It did have this incredible heyday as a holiday destination, and then cheap flights to Europe kind of changed the face of that. And he felt that Nora as a character was very much stuck in the past. So she was wearing her mum's jacket. Like, you always imagine that fur coat that she wore was something
Mm.
that belonged to her mum. She dressed in this kind of old 60s kind of style with the beehive hair, and she
Yeah.
was trapped in this past. And he wanted to show that nostalgic side of Portsmouth. And I think that he showed us that town in a very beautiful way that none of us as English people could even see, because he had no preconceived notions. He didn't see any of the maybe grime that we saw. He saw this beautiful place, and it was his unfiltered vision that might have come through there. And then a great DP and a great camera.
So you mentioned before about the camera that being this massive equipment. You guys are shooting in a small location, especially in the house. And it's funny because I actually did think about that. Um, I'm not. I don't necessarily believe that. There's certain traits that I pick up along the way, and you watch enough films, you can kind of get an idea. Okay, so the shot is set up like this. I'm wondering if because they just didn't have the time or the ability to move around the space, so they have to keep the camera still. That's actually the
Mm,
first thing that crossed my mind when I saw because there's a scene in the movie where you had come back home drunk and your boyfriend had come in and the camera's just sitting there.
yeah.
And I thought, and what I loved about that shot was because you can see that you're seeing the tension kind of build. It kind of dies down, then it builds up, and then it just dies down again. And so there's a wavelength of emotions, but the camera just sits still, watching
Mm,
it all unfold. And I thought one of two things: either that was a conscious decision to do it that way, or possibly they can't move it around. They can't move the camera around, so they have no choice but to leave it there. So so when you mentioned about the camera being so big in that locations, I think that may have answered my question. But again, I'm not sure if that was intentional to do it that way or if it's just by default you had to do it that way.
well, I think he definitely wanted that, like I said, this voyeuristic kind of view of
Mhm.
watching. And he also is a huge fan of very long takes. And so we didn't have a lot of quick cuts. Like some of the
Mhm.
scenes, the camera's here and maybe was pushing in and out, but we did, a 10-minute scene several times, and he maybe cut once in that. So that was definitely a stylistic choice.
Okay.
And also the choice to pull out when there was emotion. There was very few close-ups that when Nora, when she's in the hospital, not to give a spoiler, like, and she's emotional, he pulls away from her again because he didn't want to go to melodrama and get into the
Right.
fake.
I appreciated that
And
shot.
yeah, and then, but yeah, the one in the room was in Nora's when she's younger in her bedroom, and yeah, I just remember seeing and there being mirrors and him trying to avoid, and he did a great job. The DP was incredible.
Well, they both did a fantastic job in making the film look really beautiful. But I appreciated the fact that he just allowed the scene to play itself out. And it's funny because I remember when I was watching the film, having seen Hell, Hath No Fear, where Jesse let the camera just sit still and let everything play out the way that it does in certain sequences. Um, and then when I watched that movie, first thing that it crossed my mind too is that this guy really does. Your husband, I meant to say, does appreciate and just allowing the story just let itself play itself out. And it's not very common for us to see that nowadays, at least as far as mainstream films are concerned, because everything is about moving things quickly to keep the audience attention because their attention is really short. Um, and I understand, apart from the story aspect of it and making the characters likable, but there's a technical aspect too where people will interfere to ruin that vision, if you will. And I was very happy after hearing what you had shared before about some differences in opinion about the character and possibly the story. That I thought the way that the film had turned out, to me, it almost seemed like you guys had 100% control about what you guys wanted to show on the camera and what you guys wanted to um, finalize as far as the final cut's concerned. And it almost seemed like to me, the impression that I got that it was it was obviously a passion project, but it was a film that it almost seemed like there was no interference to some degree of allowing you to do what you want to do and and getting the vision that you wanted people to see as far as the film is concerned. And that's one of the things I also walked away feeling very appreciative about it, that because it's a very rare thing to see,
Mm.
to see a film shot so well, acted very well, written very well, and all the other things that goes with that too. And seeing that play in front of me like that, I was very content to see that um because the story was it's a very unique story, but it didn't fall in those tropes that we've seen before, which is
Mm.
another reason why I appreciate that as well too. So there's a lot that was going for the movie that I really did gravitate to, but primarily with Nora's story, which is really what I gravitated the most to, because everyone else, as far as the characters are concerned and what they were all doing, to me, it almost seemed they were peripheral. Now, I don't mean that in a negative light. It was more like we're following her story and everyone else is just kind of like chiming in and then stepping out so we can have the ability to see her journey, and they would chime in whenever this was necessary. I hope I'm not rambling too much about that, but
Not at all. Gosh,
it's
not at all.
it's something that I really had learned to respect more as I see filmmakers put together these the films and for it to turn out the way that they do. Because one of the biggest things that I've always I've learned to dislike a lot is when people dismiss a movie. Even if I don't like a movie, I still like to learn about what it took to make the film, because whether or not I agree with the film and how it turned out, whether it's something to because I just didn't like the way the film looked or whatever the case may be. But if I understand what they're going for, maybe it would make more sense to me. Whether I agree with it or not, I would have a better understanding. Um, so again, this is one of those hidden gems, in my opinion, where I would love to have people more to check it out and see it, because it really is that good, in my opinion. And I'm not blowing smoke when I say that here. So I
No,
hope,
I can, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I
yeah,
really appreciate your very thoughtful questions about it and giving me a chance to be able to talk about it. And yeah, it means a lot, because you're right that we were allowed to do whatever we wanted creatively. We had an EP that said, make the film that you want. It was a low budget film. And
yeah.
so we had a
But
lot
it
of
didn't feel that
budgetary
way though.
constraints. Thank you. That I really appreciate you saying that. The constraints we had were all time and budget.
Right.
But within that, you're right, we had the creative freedom to do what we want. And one of the things that you had kind of touched on before that I hadn't addressed that I think is important is this idea of there are some unforgivable acts, and she wasn't above that either.
Right.
And I think that was really important. Obviously, I don't want to give any spoilers either, but she had to understand that from her side, there were unforgivable acts. And she had to accept that some of her behavior was unforgivable by certain people. And I think that was really important for the story, that she wasn't ever let off the hook, for the things that she did. That, anyway, I don't know
Yeah.
why I brought that back up, but I felt
No, I
like
think it's important that you did
touching
that.
on that,
Yeah.
and I wanted to address that.
Yeah. So I hope you don't mind me jumping into another thing here, because
No,
here's the
no.
thing that I was curious about you. And I hope you don't mind with the question I'm about to ask here, because um I like to ask this question because I believe every story is different for every person when it comes to acting, directing, and so on. So, hearing a little bit about you writing the script for Solitary and then having to make the movie, going through some of the hurdles you had gone through to get the film made, and then getting the feedback, good and bad, after the initial festival run, and then all of a sudden the climate changed, and all of a sudden it became a little bit more acceptable.
Mhm.
So, now that you have been involved in the industry, as far as the filmmaking process concerned, screenwriting, acting, so on, has your perception about how you view the business and how you view filmmaking, how you view preparation, so on, has that changed a great deal for you personally? Because I'm not sure, because I've tried to listen to as much interviews as I can about your own personal love for films and whatnot, but I never really understood if it was mainly because you had a passion for what you wanted in doing this here, and then had the perception of I want to be an actor to be on the billboards, if you will. Was it
Mhm.
purely for the art, or was it did you have a little bit of that perception of wanting to be famous for because of what we've grown up with here, seeing the industry, and then coming into it, getting that rude awakening, if you will? Did that change for you along the way as far as how you approach things now more differently, or um, maybe you had some insight and then you were prepared for that?
Um, it's a really interesting question. I had very little expectations. I had I had been part of an amazing theatre group as a young person, and then I frankly really went off the rails from about the age of about 15 or 16, when I started to go out, because in small towns you go out very young, and
Mm.
I started to go out and started to drink, and party, and I really definitely went off the rails. And I was already having kind of a bit of an identity crisis from, you know, the live storytelling thing kind of delves a little bit into it. I was homeschooled, that I spoke this way and nobody in my town spoke that way. So I had to have kind of like two accents, because otherwise you'd get beaten up for being posh. And I come from a super intellectual, educated family. Both my parents were teachers. And I didn't really, I didn't fit into that path. And I have these 5 incredible sisters, and they were very book smart, and they were all going to, you know, their path I felt was quite clear. And I just didn't really relate to that. So I went off the rails, and I got thrown out of this drama, this theatre, brilliant theatre school. It was, I often wonder how my life would have been if I hadn't. And I kind of, you know, just went off and went traveling. And I guess what I'm saying is that by the time I arrived in LA, you know, in my late 20s, I had very little expectations. I was happy I'd even lived that long. And I was like, you know, I was like, I'm going to give drama school a go. And I guess I was a bit of a rebel. And as soon as I had a problem with authority, I didn't like being told what to do. And if I thought that I knew better, then I wouldn't have any issue saying it. I had a very clear idea of the kind of women that I wanted to play, and they were definitely not like hot girl number 3 and Entourage, which was what, you know, in my late 20s I was going to go in for. Wasn't interested in playing the wife or the nice submissive woman. You know, I'd come in at a tricky age, because by the time I was late 20s, and then I did drama school for 3 years, I'm now in my early 30s, like 31, 32, I'm competing against actors who are already pretty established. Plus, if you have that kind of attitude and you're going to auditions and you're really like Larry, and, you know, if someone's rude to you and you don't just, you know, meekly take it, which is what actors are meant to do. I was like, oh, this isn't going to be a linear path. This isn't going to be easy. So I need to learn how to make my own stuff, because otherwise I have kind of a darker sensibility of the material I liked. I didn't like, you know, I was a little unpolished. Definitely didn't have that kind of like slick actor coming in like, hey, and then I'll perform my scene and then I'll put myself back together perfectly so as not to, you know, and then just like, that was never me. I was always a little wild and a little bit of a rebel. So
there's a lot of similarities between what you're describing about yourself, and I do remember some things you mentioned before about the one I play that I brought up earlier. I see a lot of similarities between yourself and Nora in the film.
yeah.
So, and I wanted to ask you a question. I hope you don't mind going back to this here, but there was a scene in the movie, and I'm always curious to ask this with anybody that are a couple that do this. There isn't a sex scene in the film, but there is definitely a moment where your character is getting in, gonna have sex with someone in the film.
Yeah.
My question to you, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but
No.
how do you? So you wrote the script. I'm assuming that scene was there. How do you? How were you and your husband comfortable in having you portray that? Because I understand that, you know, this is acting. It's not real, you know, as far as, you know, the connection is concerned, but it's something that I always wonder, how a couple that is working together were to shoot something like that. Do you guys were you guys okay with that process, and do you have to discuss about it? I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with you being on top of another guy, taking off your shirt. You know, I don't like. I'm not comfortable with you doing that. Or was he like, it's just for the art? We understand our boundaries. We understand the
Oh,
relationship.
yeah.
How was that for you both, in doing that, you know, preparing for that, shooting it, and then looking back at it and having put it all together and having seen that over and over and over again?
I think that having come from Europe, nudity, human sexuality, you know, I think it's a really beautiful, natural part of a human being's life. I mean, we are in bodies, right? We're like some people say we're like spiritual beings having a human experience, or whatever your belief system is. We are in physical form, and part of being in physical form is, human connection. Neither Sasha and I have any issue with that, as long as it isn't gratuitous.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as it isn't, you're just an object to be won or lost, or you're there to move along a protagonist plot to, in a meaningless way. You're just like a bit of fluff. We're both very comfortable with that. And, he's a very respectful director, and he understood that was a really important part of Nora's journey. And I think it's a really important part of every human being's story. If it comes up, why shy away from it? Like, I don't have an issue with that at all. What I have an issue with, when I was referencing, and no disrespect to Entourage at all, but what I'm saying is, when you're just there, and you don't have a name, and you don't have anything to do except to kind of, be a bit of eye candy, that it's not interesting to me. That doesn't interest me at all. No disrespect. If that's what you want to do, like, great. It wasn't something that I connected to. But as in terms of Sasha, like, he understands it's a movie,
Right.
and we're portraying human beings, and that's what human beings do. We've all got bodies, like, we do things with our bodies, and there's nothing shameful about it.
Interesting. So basically, you guys, you had no concerns in having to write the story and say, hey, this is what I want to do with the character in the story, and she's going to be doing these things. You're
No,
cool
I
with it?
didn't. Not
Nothing like
at
that at all?
all.
Okay.
Not at all. And I think that he totally understood. We just made it funny. Like, we just told jokes and kind of tried to put everyone at ease.
Interesting.
And I think that, yeah, I never found that to be an issue. And I'll always write things in like that if it feels true to the character.
Right.
Because I think that there's no shame in it,
Right. Well, I'm glad you had said that, because again, like I said before, I had to talk with my wife a while ago about this, and one of the things that I've come across with her is that, as I had asked her a while ago, I said, if I was ever an actor and I were to do a movie and it requires me to do a sex scene, and I give her the ultimatum, like, if it's a situation where we need the money and it's going to be $10 million, I'm going to get paid, but it requires me to do a sex scene.
God, sign me up. $10 million. No, I'm kidding. Go on.
So I was just giving her, like, the possibilities of, if we are in that need, it's not a porno, but it's a sex scene, and I have, we have to get intimate, and she's going to be naked in front of me, and as will I. How would you feel about that? And she was obviously very uncomfortable with it. So there's obviously that background of how people perceive certain things and how they feel comfortable around that sort of stuff. I'm of the mindset that, if it was my wife, would I feel comfortable? Maybe at first I would question it, but knowing enough about, because my background has always been a little more was probably a little more conservative when I think about it to some degree.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of that as well too, but that's just because, we never were really open about talking about these things to really educate ourselves in that. And I think that's a lot about her as well too, that I've started to notice about where we've both come from, about how we look at certain things. We've obviously been a little more educated along the way, of course, but at that time, I remember just thinking, what would you do in that situation? If this was the situation that we're in right now, where we really need the money and I've got a great opportunity, but I have to have sex on screen with somebody and I'm going to get paid X amount of money. How would you feel about that? And that's something I want to happen in real life, but I use that as a way to kind of break the ice, if you will. Because if I just said, I want to have sex with someone on screen, I'm going to get paid $10 million. Good luck with that. And wish me luck. There's something about that doesn't appeal to me, but the circumstances does, about what led up to that and the decisions that are being made.
Yeah, and I think the crucial part of that, what you're describing, is a financial transaction, right? That
Right.
I wouldn't be
There's an
able
incentive for them.
Well, yeah, but I personally wouldn't do nudity or sex scenes from a financial transaction point of view, like,
Right.
because that wouldn't feel good for me. So
Right.
of course, the more vulnerable you are in a movie, the more you want your pay to reflect that. But that could be vulnerability because of nudity, because of sexuality, because of emotionality, because maybe you're told to lose a lot of weight or gain a lot of weight, or all kinds of things that could mean that you need your pay to reflect the levels of vulnerability that you're going to. But I feel like, first of all, I personally just wouldn't make a decision about nudity or sexuality based on money. But the other thing is, I think if anyone's ever been on a set when you're doing things like that, it's not at all.
Yeah, I've
Like
heard.
there's an intimacy coordinator, it's completely choreographed. It's not like you see in the end.
Right.
It's just part of the story. And I think actors were so used to we're playing human beings, and so we're used to doing things that human beings do, and that's
Yeah.
part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember there was I listened to a commentary of the director Tom Shadyac, who had done the first Ace Ventura movie, and I'm not sure if you've seen the film, but in the movie, Jim
Heaven.
Carrey, Jim Carrey and Courtney Cox have a love scene in the movie. It's a comedy film, but in the movie they're surrounded by animals, and it's a very funny scene, but it's obviously they're very intimate. And when I listened to the commentary, that's one of the first time I became aware of like how it's actually shot, where he had said that what you see in the film looks good, but it was the furthest from that on set. I'm telling you,
Mm,
when if we had to remove all this, the audio from the background, because what you were actually going to be hearing, if you actually saw if we revealed to what was actually going on, it's everyone who are overseeing these animals saying, "Calm down, Ben, sit still. Okay, stand over there, move over to the side." And then meanwhile, Courtney Cox and Jim Carrey are having to have this intimate moment, but everyone's shouting all these directions to all these animals to keep them still, from them to flying all over the place. It was a very wild moment in the set. And then when you see it come put it together, you don't notice that at all. You don't think about those things because obviously you don't want the audience to be aware of that.
no.
And everyone had obviously done a good job in keeping themselves composed in that situation. So again, and that's one of those things where I start to realize that it's the process of making film is a very difficult one. I've known for a while, but especially more so now. And a lot of times it's sometimes not. It's always not the most common. It's not the most common thing that I think people may perceive as being difficult. It can always be the most little things. You mentioned before about having. I mentioned before. I meant to say how everything was not shot in sequence, but you
Mhm.
had to be all over the place with these emotions, which was very difficult to do at times. And I think that was one of the hardest things you said that you had to go through to prepare for this character in preparation for this shot. Whereas I would imagine that maybe that scene where you were having an intimate moment with that fellow in the movie was probably the easiest part in comparison to having to go
Yeah.
through all those wide range of emotions where everything was shot out of sequence and you have to get yourself into that moment and prepare yourself for that. So it's little things like that I've started to pick up on, that some things may be easier than others, and other things that may not be
Yeah,
considered to be difficult are rather difficult. And some people just don't understand that.
exactly. Yeah, and also it depends on your character, right? For Nora
Right.
to do a thoughtless act, she's drunk, in that moment, that isn't particularly taxing. I mean, she's just being, a drunken, mess, and she's not thinking it through. But to, maybe if you were playing a character who was a nun, maybe, and that
Mm.
this to, or I don't know, someone who's completely inexperienced and they were kissing someone for the first time. I mean, that would be an extraordinarily difficult thing for that character to go through, to allow that kind of physical intimacy. So it depends also on the character. It's going to depend on what the character's doing, as where it's in their comfort zone. Getting drunk and singing karaoke could be every day of the week. But if you were someone who, had crippling social anxiety and couldn't even public speak, that would be just, the hardest thing. So I think the character informs it. And just to, segue back to that initial question, because I feel like I had gotten us a little off track, where you were saying about my expectations in the film business, I
Oh,
do want to say that what I have learned and what I find works for me is it's really hard to make a film. It's almost a miracle that you even get one at the end of it.
yeah.
Um, so I think if I didn't do films that meant something to me, and if I wasn't making stuff that the meaning and the reason behind it fueled me on the really hard days and the days where no one's getting it, or where you can't move the needle forward and you're struggling, I couldn't do it. And so I guess to answer that question is there has to be some sense that I'm going to make the film that I want to make.
Right.
And if I'm not making the films that I want to make and exploring the themes that I feel are important to me, I'd rather not do it.
Does the business aspect of the filmmaking industry, does that deter you at times for you to want to pursue it? Because because with the movie Solitary, I know it wasn't something that you came up with the ideas and it was ready to go in the next week. It took a long time, I would imagine, to finally get the ball rolling. But were there points where you're, being in the trenches of having to get everything started and having some hurdles to overcome, was it very discouraging at times for you to have to deal with that? Because I would imagine there's some things along the way that you have probably never dealt with before that were presented to you, and now you realize, holy shit, I have to do this now too to be able to get
Yeah.
from here to there. Like, was there a lot of, I mean, it's a learning experience, but was there a lot that you had taken from that experience that, now that you've gone through that, you're going back, reset, and see what the next step would be to not repeat the same mistakes again?
Yes. One word, I was going to say deliverables, delivery of the film
Mhm.
almost was the death of me.
Mm.
Because I was a first-time feature film producer, I made so many errors in pre-production. So then I make the film, right? The film's done. It's in festivals. It gets picked up. Now comes the delivery of it, which I had no idea anything about. And I remember being given it's called like a delivery schedule. It's like a booklet of paper of what you have to give to the distribution company, because it isn't done. If you can't give them what they need on the legal side,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
not going to be able to do it.
And
That
you're talking
took
about like
me,
scores and like make sure the music's not being copied from somebody else. It has to be original, so you have to prove all that stuff too. That's those two little details you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
contracts,
Yeah.
contracts with extras, every single face that appears on screen, you need to have a particular kind of contract that is a release of their image. Like you said, the music, all of that whole side of it. And then, you've baked a cake and you have to pull it apart and put all the ingredients together. And
Interesting.
if you've made
Oh
mistakes
man.
because you're inexperienced in pre-production, you pay for them. So that is one thing that I learned that I think
Yeah.
about now as I'm putting together my next film. I'm thinking about those things right now because that was harrowing. It took about 6 months, and there are no words to describe that. Some days that I just wake up like, that's it, I can't use this trailer because there's something in the trailer that I didn't get clearance for, and now
Interesting.
now the credits are wrong, so I'm going to have to undo the entire film and correct the credits, or I spelt one thing. I mean, it was, yeah.
Interesting. I see. I actually learned about this yesterday, where you were where I was just asking because I spoke with a director as well, who was giving me the details about the distribution negotiations, where he said they asked for everything. Is the music original? Okay, prove it. And the actors and all this, the finer details that I didn't realize existed. And that was another thing, and too, I've highlighted before with other actors and directors and so on, that the business side of it is what really, especially for indie filmmakers, where they have this vision. I want to make a movie about this, but they don't think about the business aspect too. Okay, well, can we sell the movie? Who's in the film? How much do you have it for? Well, we can't make that money back if you only have these actors in there. And the other director I was speaking to too was telling me that um he asked this particular director or producer or somebody that they had asked, how much did you spend on the film? I spent X amount of money. Wow, where did the money go to? Because there's no name actors in the film. Oh, we spent that on equipment, on the
Mm.
sets and all that stuff. And it looks great, but you're not going to get your money back because the
Yeah,
distributors are not going to care to want to look at it, because there's no value other than the fact that there's artistic value, but there's no business value. There's no value for incentive for them to want to sell the movie. And if you can't give them that reason, all that money you spent there, you'll never see it again.
yeah,
So you're pretty much walking away in debt at that point.
yeah,
So when I learned that, I was like, holy crap, this is like some crazy shit that I had an idea about, but I just didn't know the depths of it. So, I used to think when I was a kid, and I used to like the question, and the question was that, what's your best advice to make it in the business? I think that is the dumbest question to ask right now. No offense to anybody who wants to ask the question. I just don't think that's a smart question to ask, because I think for me, when I've talked, and I like to reach out to people who are, in my eyes, are the underdogs, the ones that no one knows about, because they, in my opinion, understand the value of hard work, that even if you don't know who they are, if I can recommend a film to everybody, you got to watch this movie. It's a very good film. I'd never heard of the movie. I know you haven't heard of that. That's why I'm telling you about it right now.
mm,
And then if they don't care to watch it because there's no incentive for them, well, who's in the movie? And I can name a list of actors that I'm very familiar with, but they're not going to care. Is it an independent movie? Yeah, they already have this preconceived notion.
mhm.
But you haven't given the film a shot. Then they watch the trailer. The trailer doesn't do it justice, because whoever put that trailer together did not see the film. They wanted to make it to seem a certain way. When you watch the movie, it's night and day. So there's a lot of different complicated layers that I think a lot of filmmakers that are wanting to break into the business don't realize what's involved to prepare for that. And that's something that I think it comes with self-education. You just got to go through the trenches and you'll figure it out along the way. And I see that's the most common thing I've heard from everybody. Um, I love the industry. I really, really do. But it's a very, very dark place at the same, because I realize that it can break you, but but it can also make you as well too. And it's either you're fully in or you're not. And if you're going to be halfway in, you're not going to last much longer. So I'm
Yes,
curious to hear people's story about who have been in the industry for a certain period of time and hearing their journey, because when I see the film, like in your case for your movie, hearing what you have shared about what it took to make the film, that to me is the most interesting part. The film is just the icing on the cake, but the journey to get to making the film is the most interesting, because I think for me, I've learned to appreciate the hard work that goes behind that. But the most common thing I've heard from other people is that no one's going to care what it took to make the movie, and that is very true. But the way I see it is that if conversations like this exist somewhere down the line, 10, 15, 20 years from now, someone's going to look back at what was it like in Hollywood at this time for making films. This is where this conversation will come in. It's a long-term goal that I kind of it kind of just I felt like it's I don't know if how to I don't know how I feel about it, but I that's what I want to happen, where people will look back and see these conversations take place of what it was really like during those periods, and get the rude awakening, because the Hollywood facade that we're all used to seeing here, that is not real, in my opinion.
Oh,
So
that's very
I
true.
rambled on. So
No, I really appreciate that too, because I feel like you're chronicling the time, right? The times in a way by having these conversations. Because, look, as storytellers, part of our job is to, as someone once put it, you don't reveal the secret of the sausage.
mm,
You don't want to, you want to suspend belief. And so of course you want to show a story and not have people taken out thinking how you did it. And that's what these conversations are so great for, is that I think that it does deepen people's interest and sometimes compassion, as mine's been deepened when I learn about the intent behind making a film, or the journey to making a film, you know, that that can pique a person's interest. And it is also human nature, isn't it? It's like, what is that hook? Look at that sea of films behind you, that
mhm.
I'm looking at. It's like, how do you serve up something that in that vast amount of choice that an audience member could hook onto? Well, it has so and so in it, or maybe it's a high concept film, or it's hard, because it is still commerce. It's still, you have to take it to the marketplace and sell it. And it's,
It's a fickle business too. You just never know.
it's,
You just never
and
know what's
that's
going to
why I
make it.
think, yeah, you have to do what you want ultimately.
Yeah.
Within reason, you have to follow rules, and you have to kind of make it, make it marketable as much as you possibly can. And I've definitely learned that. But at the end of the day, you've got to please yourself, in the sense you've got to be doing something that you can kind of reach back to, like on day 100 and something, and you're just like crawling through the process. You have to have something that fuels you,
Yeah.
a reason.
Very true. So I wanted to jump topics here because there's something that I'm very curious about your particular journey when it comes to acting. Because like I said before, I've came across a few things here that I've have come to appreciate, seeing how the characters you're portraying, and you sharing some insight about your own personal background too. And then I've come to realize too that the shorts that you take on here show, in my opinion, show a different side of your capability of you showing range, if you will. So, and the one thing that I want to point out first, because you've actually done a few projects last year during when COVID's what it's at, really when it's at its height.
Mm.
But the short film that I'm referring to here, I wrote it down here, was First Response, and that was
Oh,
actually based on I think it was an article running out of outlets, I think,
running out of outlets.
written by
Yes.
Kristen F. Thompson, Martin, excuse me. So when I'm watching the film, it's a pretty for the most part, there's virtually no dialogue up until the very end, and then when the very little you talk, what piqued my interest about that short was that that's the first time I've heard you put on an American accent.
Yeah.
So, and I have a lot of questions about that too, because I really appreciate what you guys were doing. There's just the simplicity of it. Just you're not there's no there's no rise of like there has to be a climax to have to feel that emotion. It's just the standard everyday stuff, and it's short and sweet, which I think worked very effectively. And then that one moment where it breaks that monotony, if you will, for the person living that your character living that moment in their time, they have a chance to speak with their loved ones, and that
Mm.
takes them out of that space, and then they go right back into that cycle all over again. That's what I took away from that. But I was also just very curious about the challenges you were taking on of something that I haven't heard you done before, which was putting on an American accent. Because I know
Mm.
that's something I believe you said before that you could do. Um, so if you don't mind, I want to make sure that I ask correctly, because I really want to get to that, but I want to focus on the story.
Mm.
That particular short, your husband had directed it, and and obviously you're the main focus of the story. What was it difficult for you guys to kind of put this story together and make it seem to make it I hate to say it like this, but make it presentable, so that way when whoever watches it understands what's going on, understands the monotony of the characters, what they're going through, not seeing the actual crisis that they're going through right now in the hospital or wherever they're located as far as work's concerned, but then seeing them come back from that rush, if you will, and just relaxing, and then having a touching moment with their family, and then going right back at it again. How are you guys trying to tell that story for you guys to feel comfortable with it, and for you to feel comfortable in presenting it to other people?
Yes. Yes. Great questions. We did shoot it on an iPhone, and it was just me and him. And then it was my brother-in-law and my nephew on
Hmm.
Skype, because
Okay.
it was the height of the pandemic. We were in complete lockdown here in LA.
Right.
One of my best friends, Angela Corey, she's a A&E nurse in Manchester, England. She has been on the front lines of this, since it began. I was, hearing what she was going through on a daily basis. We couldn't bring also anyone onto the set, so it was just me and him with the iPhone. And we'd found this article I'd seen it on Facebook that a friend of mine had shared, Running Out of Outlets by Kristen Martins, and it was describing the experience of a nurse who remotely was brought into another city, and at the time it was New Jersey. She'd come from Minnesota, and her total isolation, that she was living alone, going through this unspeakable trauma during the day or during the night, depending on, we chose to have her do a night shift. And she comes home and she's alone. She has to isolate from her family. And the article, if you ever have a chance to read it, it is harrowing. And we couldn't obviously go into a hospital and shoot. So we shot in the house, and we, kind of cheated the bathroom and, one of the rooms to almost feel like she was in hospital, where she, gets
Oh,
changed.
yeah. I see number. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we had to show, so we could only show through sound design. And because one of the things that she says is that she can't turn it off. I mean, you have what, a 12-hour turnaround. You're going from the trauma of losing patients, and that's what we were trying to show in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Was all nurses are trained to lose some patients, but the quantity of people that were dying on them was so, and it's, sadly still is, was so extreme for them, and there was no preparation for that kind of trauma. And so we knew we had to show the other side of it, where she comes home. And we just wanted to, I'm so glad you got that from it, because we did want to show this complete, Ouroboros, like the cycle that she was in, that she went to bed, and that it's the sound of that machine, the life support machine that goes off, that's almost like an alarm. Instead of the regular washing machine sounds, all those are hospital sounds that she's still hearing at the microwave. So yeah, that's all we could really do. And then the sense of total isolation that she had, that her son and her husband are kind of coping, but they're also living their life, and she's kind of in this strange limbo, hoping she doesn't get COVID. At the time, there's no vaccinations that we made this, and hoping that she makes it back to them. And I really wanted to, at the end, we dedicated it to, we didn't really have a script, we just shot from the essay, and we got the nurse's permission. We reached out to her on Facebook, on Instagram, and she said go for it. And we credited her as the writer, because she had written it. And then we dedicated it to all the first responders. It felt like this teeny tiny little speck of something proactive that we could do as filmmakers, while these people were literally serving, giving their lives.
You know what I appreciate about the story, because my wife lately has been on a Grey's Anatomy binge, and then she started getting into Station 19. So the season that she saw, I think, was 17, if I'm not mistaken. That was pretty much all COVID. And so I remember when I was watching that short, because I've seen it twice, but when I was watching the short the first time, I just watched it to see, what was going on. And then I would go back and watch it again to kind of analyze a little bit further, see what I may have missed and so on. What I appreciate about that particular short was, because I'm using Grey's Anatomy as an example, because it's the only one that I've seen from whenever I walk downstairs to when my wife is watching the show. You see the rush, and there's the license they're taking to to up the ante, if you will, and having all these different storylines going on, crossing each other's paths and whatnot. When I saw the short the second time around, I remember distinctly thinking, I wish Grey's did that, showing the silence of like being alone and having to seclude themselves from society, if you will, and then going right back into the danger zone, if you will, where everything is just ramped up again. And it could be ramped up, and not necessarily in the ways of like everyone shouting at each other, which is what happened in the show, but more ramped up in, okay, we got to get moving. Okay, keep calm. The family's over there, but they have, we have to kick them out because they're not allowed here. So someone's got to tell them, okay, in the meantime, there's a lot that in my mind, I'm picturing what your character is going through that we don't see, but just off the facial expressions and just her almost being like, I don't know if it's the right word to use, but almost being zombified, of just being emotionless, if you will. And up until you see her talking to her family, and then she's right back in that moment again. So there's a complexity about that particular story that I really did gravitate to. But I remember, I don't like to do this a lot, but I kept thinking about Grey's and thinking, I really wish you guys had done that. Obviously, they were not going to do that because they want to appeal to everybody. But That was another thing that I had noticed about you and your husband's former storyteller, because that movie actually helped me really understand the approach you guys are taking, which is not taking the standard, if you will. There's you're going the opposite of everything. So when you look at the shots, I'm not sure if it's intentional because you guys are shooting from an iPhone, but there's a dryness to the look of the film where it almost it seems very, you know, it's very lifeless, if you will, up until you see the family talking back and forth. Then you'll see a little bit more light. You see the colors, but when you look at her surrounding, it's just pretty much white walls and very lifeless.
Yeah, that was very deliberate
Okay.
because we imagined that these apartments that they're housed in, we took all the paintings off our walls and, dressed the room like that because we imagined, and from what we talked about with Kristen, that these apartments that these nurses were traveling in and living in were very bare. It's like bare bones. It wasn't their place. It was a very bleak.
Yeah. I noticed that about the film, and I'm glad I went back to watch it again because there was a lot that I did pick up from that I've come to appreciate. And I a part of me felt that if a lot of it was kind of improvised to some degree,
Yeah.
which I think you kind of answered my question on. But then this leads me to my next question with regards about you speaking and putting on an American accent. I know
Mhm.
that was intentional for the part, but for you, now that you live here in the States, is it? And I'm hearing your accent now. It's to me, it sounds still very strong.
Yeah,
With
it is.
so when you're putting on the accent, is it difficult for you to do
It
so?
is.
Okay.
It is. I'm going to be absolutely honest. I really struggle. I do audiobooks as a
Yes, I
side
know.
hustle,
Hmm.
which I love. I can do South African, Irish, Scottish, all kinds of regional English accents. Um, American accent, I really find hard.
Why
I
is it for you?
just find it hard. I don't know. It's a challenge. I've done a short film with an American accent called Pluto, and the entire movie, I felt like I could just hear myself talking in this accent. It was, yeah, it turned out hopefully okay, but I really do find it very hard, and it's something that really I'm a little insecure about, to be honest.
How did you prepare for it
Small
though? Because
disclosure.
I'll be honest with you, I did notice the English accent creeping out a little bit in certain moments, just a little bit, but I thought it was you pull it off good.
Thank
But
you.
I did notice that there were moments, and I'm not. I hope you don't mind me saying that because I'm not trying
Not
to.
at all. I can hear them, and
I
it's
could
a
too,
challenge.
but I could
It's,
see that you tried and you really
yeah.
tried. But
I wish I could say it was anything external, but I guess there's just areas in every, aspiring creatives or artists repertoire that's hard for them. And
mm,
I mean, I live with an American, I hear Americans every day. I think there are some English actors who do flawless American accents, and
yeah.
Matthew Rhys,
Oh yeah, I know who
Harry
he is.
Mulligan,
Hmm.
and then
Henry
on the other
Cavill too.
side, what's that?
I was a Henry Cavill does a pretty good American
Yeah,
accent.
they're brilliant. And I
Yeah,
think that I'm sure that takes a great deal of work. I know
yeah.
personally Matthew Rhys works on it all the time. And I don't know why I find that one hard. There are obviously everyone has accents that they find easier. My mum's South African. Even though she didn't speak with a South African accent, I have a lot of South African friends. And so maybe there's something in there, that is easier for me. Whereas I'm sure there are people who really struggle with that one. It's a very odd accent.
Mhm.
Um, as in it doesn't really sound like anything else. But anyway, yeah, I find it challenging.
So speaking of
Think
accents,
challenging.
I came across because you mentioned about Irish accents. So you did a monologue. I'm trying to see where I wrote it here because I want to make sure I did not miss it. It was where you were doing a confession.
Oh,
Um,
yes, that's
oh,
right, for
here.
playwriting. Wow, you really dug in. I'm so impressed. Thank you
So
for
you're
sharing.
welcome. Well, this is for I think it's pronounced Asios Theater's monologue night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, exactly. That was
So
in COVID too.
yes, so you played an Irish woman, if I'm correct.
Did,
Okay,
yeah.
So you played an
That would
Irish
be
woman.
awkward if it was some totally different accent. No,
Well, I
but
actually went back to watch it again because Ireland is a country that I unless I'm watching it in movies, I can hear the accent, but I'm
mm,
not around enough Irish people to really understand, to
yeah.
really, oh, I know you're part of that. That I'm not familiar with here. English people, surprisingly, I can pick up mostly because I've I've been around quite a few of them, and I've also watched a ton of movies with a lot of English people. So I'm
Mm,
familiar with most accents, not every single one. Your accent, I'm sorry, your monologue, I was trying to say, was that it also dealt with another very tough issue where
mm,
it's a character who is a very is conflicted. She wants to do the right thing, but then she is thinking about herself.
mhm.
And this is where I started to appreciate where I was talking before about you and your husband, where I'm starting to notice the trend of your performances and your storytelling, where you guys are picking up really dark spots and they're very conflicted, and then you're left to wonder: are they good people? Are they bad people?
Mm.
It's a very tough choice, and I'm sure some people will have opinions about that particular monologue if they were to hear
Oh,
it.
I can imagine.
So, but when I'm listening to your talk, what really impressed me, to be honest with you, is, and it's always impressed me with a lot of people who do, is that you're still able to convey those emotional beats with the facial expression, but still be able to maintain the accent. So it never took me out of the monologue, if you will. That's one thing that I want to look out for, is that is it going to take me out of the moment, if you will. It's one of very few times I've come across watching monologues where people talk and I don't think about the accent until after the fact. So with you, I really did appreciate how you have been able to convey those emotional beats with this character when you're cursing up a storm, and then you're holding back, and then you're expressing yourself, and then you can clearly see that wavelength of emotion of what the character is going through and confessing all their emotions. And then at the end of the day, they say, well, fuck it, I'm just gonna do what's best for me, and this is what I decided. And you're like, oh, well, that was rough. And then that was it. That was the end of the story.
Mm.
So I'm hoping that you could also explain about that process for you too. Was that something that was given to you for you to work on? Did you come up with that? Did you were you given to work on it, and then you were able to alter to make it fitting to your sensibilities, if you will? Because there's a lot of darkness that I picked up on your stories that I noticed in that character too. So
Mm.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I actually wrote that piece.
Okay.
I submitted it as a writer to that theatre. On Instagram. This great she's Australian, or she might be Austrian actress, but anyway, she's wonderful, and she had started this theatre company in COVID, and then asked for people to submit these monologues for a
Mhm.
night, and I did, and then she knows I'm also an actress, and she's said, are you going to perform it? So I ended up performing the monologue too, and it is a very difficult topic, and it's something I feel is an immensely difficult subject and very hard for people to deal with. Are we able to say the topic,
Oh,
or
abortion? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't.
yeah, centered around a woman with a conflicted feelings about having an abortion? And I guess what's important to me as a creative person is we're humans. We have incredibly complex lives and incredibly complex issues to deal with in the human experience. And I think that what I'm interested in is universal stories. So whether or not you have ever experienced this one particular thing this woman's going through, I feel like we all struggle with, am I a good person? How do I balance making good decisions against making what society might perceive as a selfish decision? Where do I walk this line between honoring myself and my truth, and also the fact I'm part of a bigger society? Like I feel like that is a universal subject. I don't know, I've never met anyone who's just feels great about themselves and has never been through any trauma and has never like struggled with feeling ugly inside or broken or desperate. And if they have, like, more power to you. Like, if you've never experienced that, I'm happy for you. But every human I've met has had struggle and has
Mhm.
had hardship, and have felt conflicted, and have had moments of severe self-loathing. And I feel like I want to, what's helped me in those moments, like I felt like I was saying, very I didn't fit in anywhere growing up. I felt completely lost, like there was nobody like me around, that I was just this weirdo misfit, homeschooled, like, you know, with ginger hair and like national health glasses, which are like these glasses you get free from the government. It was just I was a mess. And I guess I've started to feel like there was some hope when I watched things about people who were, you know, when I watched a David Lynch movie, or I watched movies that were about darker, more complex characters. I was like, oh, I was like a light in the darkness. Or if I read a piece of poetry that was about people who, you know, felt conflicted about themselves, and, you know, that was what gave me hope. And so that's what I don't want to shy away from those issues. I don't want to shy away from the darkness. I want to just kind of like talk about things.
Yeah, and here's the thing about that particular story, that monologue I'm about to say, where you could see the moment when the character is saying, I don't want to do this, and then they're obviously in their abortion clinic, and they're still debating whether they want to do it or not. And then you could see where the character is very, you know, they're on the you know, for me, what was difficult, what wasn't difficult, but for me, the way I saw it for that character is that if you didn't want to do it, you wouldn't be there in the first place. So there's a conflict of interest for the character where they are, to me, it seemed like they were focusing on the superficial side of it as far as life's concerned. You know, I want to be happy, and I don't want a baby to be holding me back. I'm not saying that they're wrong in saying that, but because I'm trying to be careful on how I word it, because I want to make sure that how I'm explaining to makes sense with how I viewed it. So the character to me was more like somebody who was very, they were unhappy to begin with, and then they felt like they may have made a mistake, so they felt like they have to get rid of the mistake, and then they realized, wait a minute, this is wrong because of possibly their background, you know, being that she's Irish, maybe she's Catholic, maybe she's Presbyterian.
Or
um
Catholic, she was confessing.
oh, that's right, that's right, I'm sorry, you're right, you're
Oh, I don't know if Presbyterians do confess. I
no,
grew up
if
Catholic,
she's
so I don't.
Catholic, because I was thinking, because I'm thinking and talking at the same time, and I'm like all over the place. So
Well,
that's why I'm trying to.
other religions may confess too. I've no idea. They
Yeah,
could.
well, but she is Catholic though. So, but what I'm trying to get is that she's obviously looking for some sort of approval, or hey, can you give me the answer right now?
Yeah.
Could you give me something to
That's-
say, do it like this, and everything's going to be fine? And that's the complexity that like I said before, that darkness of like, can, you know, if I do this here, does this make me a bad person? And then eventually they realize that no one's going to give me the answers, so I have to make it up for myself. So I'm not making to make a decision for myself. So therefore, I'm going to have to decide what's best for me. I don't want a baby, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And that's a very hard thing to digest for some people, because for a number of different reasons, personal beliefs and religion, whatever the case may be. But that's also the reality too, that happens a lot that most people will not talk about. And I've actually talked with somebody a while ago. This is a long, long time ago, where they had told me that they had their baby aborted, and then they had a child, you know, years down the road, and they were very thankful that, according to her words, that, you know, God had given me another child and had forgiven me. And I'm like, wow. I mean, I'm not saying that they were wrong, but that's the mindset. And I'm thinking to myself, would that, because I remember that story, watching that monologue, and I'm thinking, is she going to make the same decisions too down the line, where she's probably experienced her fun, and then therefore, hey, I'm ready to have a kid. I'm gonna go confession. Like, there's a lot that goes on in my mind about
Yeah,
what
of
I felt like the story of
course.
going.
And
So
this is the point of these things, isn't it? Is to
yeah,
start a conversation, because I think if you could sum up my beliefs, or not beliefs, but I think it's always both.
yeah,
It's not one thing. You can be convinced you've made the right decision and still be tormented for the rest of your life. You could make a decision in another way. I mean, this is what I'm interested in. It's the same what we were talking about solitary with Nora. She she is the, you know, Byronic hero in a way. She's more sinned against than sinning. she's an unforgivable, flawed person to some, and she's also had unforgivable things happen. She's all of it. And I think that I'm interested in stories and characters that don't give us any easy answers. We can only assume. We have to also understand this character is putting on a performance for a priest because she was raised in a particular way, and she does want absolution. And there's moments in there where she realizes, well, as much as you try, you can't understand what that feels like. And you never, ever will, because you don't have the ability to grow a human soul. You don't live under the weight of what that is. And you never will. The same way I will never understand certain things that people who identify as male go through. I will never understand what it is to go to war and what it is to serve a country and to be maimed and potentially physically ruined for the rest of my life in service of something that I believed in. I don't know what that feels like. I can't imagine it. I can't conceive of it. And I think the grace comes not only between genders, but between all people, when we can allow these questions, like you and I, from totally different worlds, bringing up these ideas and kind of being, they're uncomfortable and awkward and anxiety inducing in some ways, and talking about these really hard subjects. And neither of us have the answer to it. I don't have an answer to any of it, but the grace can come from the discussion of an understanding that there really isn't any clear answers in really barely anything.
Yeah.
And so we just can, like, as long as we keep talking, as long as we keep deepening our compassion, as long as, you know, we can not shy away from uncomfortable things,
Yeah.
we at least might make. What I do believe is that shutting things away in the dark does not work. It just bringing things out into the light, even if all we do is just sit there kind of feeling uncomfortable and weird and worried about what we're going to say in case someone's going to judge us or we're going to get cancelled. Like, even if that is all we do, at least we've brought a little light onto something, because it's still going to happen. I feel like that's what I try to explore.
And that's what, and I do agree with you on that. And that's what I said before about the form of storytelling you like to go for. And I actually, when I look back at it now with Hell Hath No Fury, because I know you took on the project to fit it to Jesse's vision, but even when I look at Nina's character, Marie, there's still that complexity about, you know, what she was doing with von Bruckner, where she's in a relationship with him. She's obviously having a very intimate one that she seems very motivated to be with him. But you're not sure if it's for the mission, or did she feel in love with the guy, and then eventually you question where she stands. I mean, you understand her mission, you understand the purpose behind it, but there's the finer details that doesn't really get delved into with the story, which was one of the things I loved about the film. But I said it in my review, but I wanted more, because I wanted to see more of that complexity about what led up to that moment, to get a better understanding, especially with the way the film ends. And I won't ruin for anyone who hasn't seen it, but there was a lot that was left to be desired in a positive way, because the fact that I want more for me was a good thing, how everything turned out. But even the complexity of Marie, which is someone who is obviously hurt and she's sleeping with the man that had killed her family, but she's sleeping with a guy. What does that say about her? And that's the complexity, where I think it's really hard for people to understand, because one, you're not in the person's shoes, which is where I'm coming from. That's where I want to see where that came to that point, so I can have a better understanding where she's actually coming from and knowing why she made those decisions. And if she really did fall in love with a guy, what was it about him that she fell in love with that she was able to overlook, knowing what he had done to her family? So there's a lot that I really was left to wanting to see more of as a result of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the mouth lies, the body doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give it away either, but ultimately there was complexities to the war.
Mm-hmm.
There was complexities to the external situation. For me personally, I was very clear, and she was I mean, this isn't giving it away. She's a spy.
Mm-hmm.
spies have sex with people that they don't like for the mission. And there wasn't a question for me as to why that was happening. She's part of the French resistance, and unfortunately the nature of female spies and female resistance fighters were you use your sexuality, like in The Wrestler, I don't know whether you've seen that film with Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, of course.
He very cleverly held up these two iconic things that we use, right? Women use their sexuality when they have nothing else, when they run out of options, or when they're in situations like the resistance workers, or if they're spies, or if you're broke, or if you have no money. You will always use your sexuality, or not always, but you will use that to survive, because this is the most basic thing that a woman has. And a man, like in The Wrestler, has his strength and his physicality. And violence. And you think of the old gladiators, violence was something a man could sell. A bare knuckle fighter, men will rely as readily on their brute physical strength in the same way that a woman will rely on her sexuality. Because of a myriad of reasons, there is a lot of shame that is attached to a woman using her sexuality that isn't attached to a man using his physicality, even though they're both ultimately the most base elements of being a human being. One is exalted and one is celebrated and one is accepted and one is shamed. And for me, Marie, if you are a young, beautiful resistance fighter, and you're trying to save your country from Nazis, and you have to be involved with a Nazi officer in order to fight your war, what are you going to meet up to go for a walk on the beach? Like, how do you get information? You're going to sleep with the guy. This is what was the reality for all female spies. It's what Red Sparrow is about. I mean, what are you going to do? Go, oh no, sorry, I just want to go to the movies and chat. Like, of course not. This is what, and the same way that men who have no options, who have come from poverty, who have no family money, they will go and be mercenaries or go to war and be on the front line, and they're the cannon fodder. And they're as wasted in war as, and I tried to put that element in this, they're as, used by the war for their brute strength as women like her were used for their sexuality. It's not going to be the French guy digging graves, like, blowing Van Bruckner for secrets, is it? It's like, what? It's going to be Marie because of how she looks. So that wasn't vague for me. That was a woman who did what she had to do in order to fight for a cause that was larger than her. If people perceived that she might have in any way have been in love with a man that tortured her parents, that's not, I personally didn't see it that way, but if that's, I'm like you've seen throughout this interview, I'm happy for the questions. I don't need to tell people what they need to get from something. I'm happy that there's a conversation around it, but that for me was clear that she was a spy. And
I
she was beautiful.
I never thought of it really that way, to be completely honest with you. I guess because I was telling, because I talked to Jesse about this before, and he liked it to. He told me, I meant to say that he would like for the audience to kind of figure it out for themselves and kind of put the pieces together for them to come up with their own narratives, if you will, about what led up to that. And I'm kind of in the middle when it comes to that, because I like the mystery, but I also like the lead up to that mystery for me to get a clear understanding. So but again, when I say that, I always try to be very cognizant of how I say, because I don't want to make it seem as if though I'm saying I didn't like that you should have added more. That's not what I'm intending on doing here at all. It's more about that, because I love what I was watching. I love the characters, most of the characters, but I love the actors and the performances and the way everything was put together, that there was a lot that I wanted to learn more about them. And the fact that we were just given, what we were given here, there was something that about the story that I feel like Jesse and everyone else had accomplished in really telling an effective story for you to, at least for me, wanted to see more of that. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's a testament, despite my selfishness about what I wanted out of the film, wanting more. But I think it really speaks volumes about what you guys have done to be able to accomplish, um, in creating a narrative that I thought had left a really good impression to showcase what good storytelling is without having to tell you the full story. So I think
Right.
that worked very well.
Yeah. And also, like war itself is dirty and complex and unfinished, and it's a mess.
Hmm.
It's just a big mess. And I think that that's what Jessie managed to accomplish. And also Nina, the
Yeah.
fact that she gave such a great performance means that von Bruckner he didn't know. He still loved her. And maybe she felt, as the actress, and this is the brilliance of collaboration, right? That maybe she had developed feelings in that relationship. Sex is a very intimate thing for a woman. Who knows what parts of herself she had to kill off in order to fight her fight, which was for France. Who knows what, the lies that that woman had to tell herself in order to lie with that man, in order to, you know, be with him in that way. Like, of course it's complex, but ultimately her actions tells us her true feelings. And obviously we don't need to do a spoiler, but that was very, very important to me.
Yeah.
It makes me, that was very important to me, that was clear at the end.
So I'm curious about the next thing I want to bring up here with you. You had mentioned before that you were talking about, you briefly mentioned, to say about working on your next project. Is this going to be another feature length film that you're looking into and that you're working on right now, or is this going to be a short film that you're looking into potentially producing here?
No, it's a feature length.
Okay.
It's a crime drama, and I've actually set it this time in the north, where I was born and raised. That's where I hope to shoot it. We're in development, so obviously
Right.
I'm just about to get the budget and schedule back, where I may need to make adjustments or may need to rethink certain locations or scenes. So I'm kind of in that early stage, but I would like to shoot it in the northeast. And it's a feature length crime drama.
And
It's
are you
very
looking to potentially have that shot sometime in the early parts of 2022, mid or later parts of 2022?
exactly early parts of 2022. It's
Okay.
very ambitious, and I hope, also we have to think about light and weather and everything. But yeah, I would love to do that then, but I'm still putting the pieces together. But it's I say it's kind of a follow-up to Solitary, not because it's anything to do with that same world, but it's my next feature that I've written for myself to produce, as opposed to, being brought onto other people's films. So yeah, it's exciting. I'm
And
ready.
you're going to be starring in the film too?
I am, yeah,
Okay.
I
And is your
am.
husband going to potentially direct it as
It
well?
is. So
Oh, okay,
it's
great. I'm
exactly
glad.
the same creative team.
I'm
So
glad.
yeah, it's very exciting.
That sounds really good. That sounds really interesting. I'm very curious now that I've seen Solitary and listened to and watched your the work as well too, on how that's going to turn out. I'm really excited to see what you're going to be doing with that.
It won't
Um,
be a Christmas musical, as you've probably gathered. It won't be a Christmas light piece of fare, but that's okay. It's on brand and it's what I want to do. So, and
well,
hopefully my writing's improved now.
well, honestly, I feel like I've never got the impression, and I hope you understand where I'm coming from, that whatever you've written, it never came across amateur, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So whatever you've done so far that I've come across that you have written and delivered, not once did I ever think of, oh, I can see that she's still, still fine tuning the details. I mean, yes, I have noticed that from watching your monologues and then seeing the film, that there has been improvements, but that's just because, as the years have gone by, you've developed you've worked on the material that you were able to fine tune other things. So that's expected, but I've never once felt that I could see the potential, but needs more work. Never felt that at all. So I think that that's something that I've seen. I think it's for me, it was clearly obvious that you were very much in tune with what you want to do. And it was just all about getting it done and
Mm.
sticking with that. Is what I got the impression from you. I actually want to ask you one thing, because this is the one thing that I came across here that was actually a big surprise for me. Two things, actually, I should say. So a lot of things I've come across have always been very grounded material as far as the dramatic aspect of, the storytelling. But I've come across two things that I've one you didn't write and direct, but you were part of, which was Clean Freak, which I did appreciate.
Oh yeah.
And I really like that one too. And then the one that you and your husband did called "It's Not Rocket Science," which was another one that I didn't when I first saw, I think the first 2 minutes of it, I didn't really understand what was going on. And I'm not saying that in a negative light. It was just that, is this meant to be a comedy, or is this meant to be something a little more serious? And then obviously the way that that short had ended, I was like, oh, okay. So I went back and watched it again, then I got a better understanding of it. But these were the only two things that I've come across that you have done that was completely different from the previous material that I've seen you in before.
Yeah.
That was um, that had made me see that you could actually adapt to the material, that you could actually go about and delivering what would be required for the narrative, but still have that comedic sensibilities that I thought worked very effectively, especially with Clean Freak, which I thought you're very posh and very, uptight. And then I was like, oh, that is such a British thing that I've seen before that I really did appreciate. And then because that was written and directed by I wrote here Chase Ulrich.
Yeah,
And
that's he had a Funny or Die YouTube series
I was
about
familiar with
him
him.
trying to find a roommate. It
Yeah.
was actually really funny.
Yeah. So when I saw that, it was actually a nice surprise to see that you had done something of that sort. So and I hope you don't take it the wrong when I say this, but it was like a breath of fresh air when I saw that. So but I was hoping that if you could delve into that with both you and your husband working together on It's Not Rocket Science, and then you working with Chase on the Clean Freak. If you don't mind just sharing what led up to that and how you come about and
Yeah.
actually performing it there.
Well, It's Not Rocket Science was another COVID project. And my poor husband, because I entered this 24-hour playwright competition on Twitter. I had a lot of time on my hands.
Mm.
And anyway, it's, if you were picked out of this kind of raffle situation, you had to make and act in a play in 24 hours and then post it. And so I didn't think I was going to get, and then suddenly I get this message, and I'm 8 hours ahead, in LA. So I think I'd got it in the morning and I'd already lost like 6 hours because I was sleeping. And they were like, oh, you've got like, I had like 18 hours to write it. And then I couldn't bring any actors in, and I didn't want to do a monologue. So I said, my husband isn't an actor. And I was like, you have to act in this thing. And he was like, what? I was like, we have to do it in, no time. And I had to send it to my friend to edit it. So they gave us a title, and mine was It's Not Rocket Science. And then you had to write a 2-minute piece around that sentence and then send it in by the deadline. So it was very fast, and it was meant to be just a bit of fun and a bit of levity.
Yeah.
And I love my dog, so I wanted to play.
So you know what what I love, because the punchline, which was both you and your husband are asking about, who's going to get. I'm forgetting the dog's name in the scene.
Bubba.
Bubba,
Bubba's
yes.
character, yeah.
So when you both were asking Bubba, who do you want to go with, and walking away, I was like, that's hilarious, because that, to me, that was the punchline. Because again, I'm glad you had done that, because again, I'm hoping that one day, if given the opportunity, I'm sure if it's a story that you really are passionate about, that you would actually do something of that sort, where you really can showcase another side of your acting, if you will.
Yes.
Where you could see more of that, because I thought you and your husband did that very well, especially from what I saw in Clean Freak, where it's obviously your character is very uptight, but the way the deliverance of those comedic beats I thought was really, really funny. Where she was like, "What's that right there? That's my dog's bowl. Does he eat out of there? Yes, he does. Well, and then just the series of events that occurred that eventually made you walk away. So there's a lot that I thought that you had done very well when it came to the performance of your character in that short film. That honestly, I wanted to see a little bit more of that. So I was actually looking. That's how I came across a bunch of your stuff here. But I was like, let me see what else she's done to see if I can find more of her work on film. And then it led to one thing, which led to another there. But that was actually something that I was really happy to see to showcase something
Yeah.
outside of your comfort zone, if you will.
Yeah, and that was what theatre always filled that gap for me, because I'd started in theatre and I did all my comedy on stage. So, and I would always be
Like
cast.
improv?
No, it was like comedic plays.
Oh,
So I
okay.
did, Private Lives. Is kind of the classic character where she's that, seemingly like quite uptight society girl or woman, and then she's really kind of a bit naughty underneath, and she blows up her life. And I'd often get cast in that kind of role, like, which I loved. I loved doing the comedy, and that's how I got my SAG card, because my first equity job, I got equities like the Actors Union on stage, and I got cast in this play, this comedy, and yeah, that was my first professional acting job. So that I loved doing comedy, and I did it, I did a lot of comedy on stage, and then I guess I just didn't explore it in film, but I do love it.
Do you plan on wanting to do that for yourself? Because I mean, since you're taking on projects for yourself and you're creating it, is that something you plan on doing somewhere down the line to try to test the waters, if you will, to see what you could do, with you were able to pull off in a feature length film, but then bring that with the comedic aspect of it too,
Yeah.
and provide? Because to me, here's the thing that I've noticed about Solitary. And I think about it now, when I had time to look back on it, where when I see the way the story is being told, as far as the performances are concerned, and as far as how the character's journey, if you were to flip that around and remove the seriousness of the story, the very difficult subject matter, and you flip it around and make it into a comedy, it would have worked just as well. Because I think the same sensibilities you carry on in telling a dramatic story and turning that into a comedic story where your character is not very likable, but imagine that being in a comedy sense, and under those comedy lenses, if you will. So I think about that now, and I'm thinking, if that was just turned, if you just tweak a lot of things and made that to a comedy film, I think it would have worked just as well, to have that same effect too. Obviously, not with the dramatic piece, but more of just the punchline, if you will, which I think you
Yeah.
have a lot of that in Solitary, but with comedic beat, I think I'm curious to see how you be able to pull that off, if you were to come down
Yeah.
to doing it.
Kind of like the crazy, it's like the odd couple, isn't it? One's this crazy, messy mess, and then the other one's like really uptight. It's kind of like, yeah, I
Yeah,
can see that with the
but
uptight sister.
I'm thinking about how you're not going to follow the traditional side of it here too. So making it a comedy, I'm not, and I hope you don't. I hope you don't just come off. I'm telling you what to do. That's not what I'm trying to do.
Oh my
But
God, I love this. I'd never, maybe that will be the follow-up, Solitary to the comedy.
well, it's just that because I'm thinking about it now, where you're taking an approach with your stories that is not traditional, where there is a happy ending, there's no solid ending, but taking those same sensibilities, but with comedy. And so I'm really curious with the way you think, how you would be able to infuse that narrative into a comedy and do something different with that. Because there's so many things you can do with films, and comedy is one of those things that's very, very difficult to pull off. A lot of people can pull off dramatic films, but very few can pull off very well. But to do a really good comedy is a very difficult thing. I'm confident in saying that I think if you were to work on it, I really think you could pull it off, based upon with what I've seen with those two shorts, where I think you've had that sensibility to tell a very creative story with those sensibilities, and not telling it in a traditional format, if you will, and telling it a much more unique perspective, but with sprinkles of comedy in there. So I hope I made sense when I'm saying
No,
that.
it does, and I appreciate it. And I will just say that, yeah, making people laugh is a lot harder than making them cry. Like, I have such respect for comedians. I think that's more scary, right? And like,
Yeah.
especially like stand-up comics, like I feel like that is my worst terror. It's like to come out on stage and hope people laugh at your jokes. I mean, it's very immediate. It's like if people watching a drama could just be like watching it, and you can't really tell, right, whether they're experiencing it. With a comedy, if they're not laughing, like you've immediately you can tell that you failed in a way. Like, it must be terrifying. It's really it's for the bold and the brave. maybe I'll be brave enough one day, but yeah, I respect comedians a great deal.
But when you're looking back at some of the things you've done, I'm bringing up the Zoom call, the Zoom shows you've done, and looking at the monologues you've done. Do you ever take time to think about how you feel like you may have improved in terms of storytelling, acting, or in this case, the business side of it too, where you started or where you are with now? I mean, I would imagine that you feel like you have evolved into having a better understanding of how certain things works, where you may had a preconceived notion, and then all of a sudden going through the experience, then you have more a better awareness of how to look at it with a much clearer lenses to approach it more differently, a little more methodically, if you will. Especially when it comes to something that maybe you've never done before, as far as, let's say, the comedy stuff, where you've never done that, as far as you writing a script and making a story out of that. But because you've had the experience of what the hard work that is involved to get those, put everything together, you're willing to take a risk on something you've never done before, but understand the preparation for that to get the job done, and accepting on the new challenges that would come with that too. So, um, I hope my question made sense, because I'm trying to, my point is that I'm trying to see if how you feel like you've improved with virtually every parts of your storytelling, your writing sensibilities and your acting sensibilities, and how you feel like you've looked at yourself from the past and where you are with it now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think putting in your 10,000 hours is, as they say, is always going to give you a different level of confidence and a different level of ease. And I think that's a huge part of success, is just how comfortable, like, I'm sure for you, like the first time you do this, it must have, I'm sure it was like, oh,
It
and
still
then
is that way too sometimes.
of course, and otherwise it would be boring, right? If we didn't feel that kind of like, "Ooh," why would we even want to do it? But I think, yeah, I think the show don't tell, as in, yeah, you want to show what you're going through, maybe physically, especially in writing, as opposed to being too expositional and just saying what's happening. And the same, for an actor, like trusting the audience is going to understand what you're going through without being too big, or I think taking myself a little less seriously. When I got here, like I said, I'd come from this kind of wild life, and I thought that I took it very seriously, and I felt like it wasn't like penance, but I
So
felt
rigid,
like,
right? You were very rigid with that.
yeah, and I'd spent so much time just like, whoa, like, what I perceived as kind of like frivoling my life away with no career, no direction, like, that I felt, it almost felt like, well, now you have to work twice as hard. You have to be the most disciplined. You have to, like, to make up for this, and once I kind of relaxed and was like, okay, your life is what it is. It didn't work out the way you maybe expected, but that's okay. It's it's that we all get there, right? This self-acceptance, who we are, we embrace what's led us to where we are, and being able to like ease off the pressure a little more and laugh at myself a little more, and like, and let go of some of the perfectionism, being able to say, yeah, my American accent's tough, and sometimes it sucks, and I do my best, and that's okay too. Like, you being able to take that pressure off and not feel like you have to be perfect at everything, and because you can't be. And then when you invariably fail at that, perfection, you then riddled with self-loathing and self-doubt, and then that holds you back. And this kind of like thing that I think that's my biggest growth, is just going, especially during COVID, acting is a blessing. To be able to say I'm an actor, to be able to make money as an actor and write and produce, what a gift. What a gift to be living that life, and that my contribution is to tell a story about it, but not to experience it. That brought a lot of things into perspective, just how lucky I am to be able to do this job, So I think that brought a kind of, not levity, but it brought like a, a sense of like, you need to relax a little.
Are you at a place? Are you at a point right now with your life, as far as your career is concerned, and how or what you've gone through right now, where you really are happy with what you have been able to accomplish here? Because I mean, for me, when I look at solitaire, this to me that this clearly obviously it was a labor of love, and the way it turned out for me looked like it turned out to be. I would imagine some ways when you look at the film, you realize, wow, this is a lot better than I thought it was going to turn out. That was kind of the impression that I got when I first saw the movie. That there was a that at one point where you're putting the films together, you're realizing, wow, this is turning out really really good, and I think I've made something really really special that you feel very confident in looking at and wanted to share. But do you still feel content with how things are going for you right now, especially now that you've gotten to a point where you have learned a lot about yourself and you learn a lot about how to do things more efficiently, a little more to collaborate more, and also to expand on your arsenal, if you will, and having to work on things you may have struggled in and now be able to have to we're now working on a more consistent basis to develop those other areas that you may have been lacking in. So are you happy with yourself now in what you've been able to go through and to get to where you are right now?
I think it's a work in progress, and yeah, I think I'm getting there, and I in some ways I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface of what I want to do. And I think I'm always going to kind of have that little feeling of doubt, like that I'm late to the party, that I haven't done enough, that I should be doing more, which is that horrible little voice that you want to try to manage or ignore.
Mm,
um, so that's one side, and then the other side is, yeah, I I am I'm proud of some of the collaborations that I've been lucky enough to experience in the business, and these little pockets of bliss, and these little victories, and that I've been able to experience. Um, I think I just have so much more that I want to do. You know,
right.
I do. I definitely feel like I want to do a lot more, but I'm really also grateful for the things that I've done and the opportunities I've been given, for sure.
When I had reached out to you in the beginning, I said before, I look for the underdogs. I look for somebody out there that people may not be familiar with here, because I really do believe there's such thing as, you know, the hidden gems that exist out there that are really putting in the work, that are creating some really amazing projects that most people may not hear about. And those are the type of people that I gravitate to, because I really appreciate the hard work that they're putting into it, knowing full and well that this is a very rough and a very fickle business that can break you and it can also make you,
Mhm.
and something to do both at the same time. And it's a very complex thing too that I think a lot of people don't really understand. Where they're when that's why I used to. I don't like the question anymore of how do you make it in the business, because I don't think it's about that anymore. I think it really has changed so much that people have been, I should be more wiser now that making it doesn't necessarily mean happiness, or that making it doesn't necessarily mean success. Um, it because if you weren't successful and you're still doing it, so obviously you're doing it for other reasons that are more, I would imagine, more realistic reasons, for more grounded reasons rather than superficial reasons. Which, I was one of those people that felt that I wanted that because that's what appealed to me.
Of course.
So I appreciate you telling me, sharing me with your story, because what I would love to hear see happen, and I say this a lot with people who are on the show, but I really do mean this here, is that I hope that one day, somewhere down the line, that someone would look back at this and then happen to come across you or happen to know you and say, I saw an interview done X amount of years ago, and this is where you are at your life. This is where you're at this point in your life right now, and these questions were asked of you, and you gave an answer, and this is what you said, how you felt about that moment.
Mm.
Do you look at it now? Do you still feel that way about it now? You may not remember, or you may remember, but if you look back and you look at those little details and you realize, holy shit, that's what I felt at that time. I didn't. It's so amazing how I've grown from that, and how I evolved from where I was there into where I'm at now. And that it's like planting a seed that I know is a long term goal, But my goal is for I hope that someone would come across and see this and share this with you, and hopefully you look back at this with fond memories to see where you were at that time and then where you are with yourself now, and hopefully it will be a point where you're happy with where you are at that point. So that's what I'm hoping would happen for you, and really for everyone whoever is on the show. So
That's beautiful. I love that. That's such a
oh
beautiful intention.
yeah.
And I feel really grateful, and I want to say thank you for bringing me onto the show and asking such thoughtful questions, and also for having such a beautiful, worthy intention for your questions and for your show. I really feel very honored that you invited me on.
Oh well, the honor's mine, believe me, because like as I said before, I knowing learning more about you as we were conversing here, it had made me start to appreciate what you're going for. And as a result of that, especially after solitary and even after some of the shorts I've come across too, you've got a fan in me now. And with what you're working on now, with this upcoming project that I'm hoping will shoot very early next year, and what comes out of it, I'm looking forward to see how that turns out, because I trust from what I've seen before, what I've come across, that you're still consistent with your sensibilities about how you want to share the story and not approaching it in a traditional fashion, as I mentioned before. So I'm really excited to see what direction you're taking with this new story you're working on right now, and how that's going to be flipping the genre, if you will, in a perspective that most people probably may not consider trying, or probably be want to try, but will be too scared to try. But you've got people that would be willing to back that up and give you the benefit of doubt to allow you to tell your story the way you want to. So that's what I'm hoping would happen as well too for that.
Thank you. That's beautiful.